I want to introduce Gillian Flynn, who is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of Gone Girl. And we've had all your books checked out for a very long time, so I know there's lots of fans here. Just to give those of you who are less familiar with her a little sort of general description of what she writes, I like to say she writes really what you would expect, almost like Alfred Hitchcock movies. She writes stories like that. Psychological suspense is the library term for it. But these are stories which make you feel uneasy and not trusting everything. And we'll talk a little in detail about it. I like creepy. Obviously, she likes creepy. And surprises. These are not going to be the cookie cutter stories you get, everywhere else. So thank you for coming. Do you want to say anything?
Thank you for having me. Thank you all for coming out. This is such a nice reception. It's very, very cool to look out and see everyone here. So thank you for making the trek out tonight on a summer night.
I wanted to start with sort of your background. I don't know if everyone knows, but you do have a journalism degree, and you started off writing about on a crime beat. And a lot of your books have a true crime angle. You're not a crime writer anymore in terms of, beat writer, but what still draws you to it as a writer?
Well, I should say, first of all, I was a failed crime beat writer, which is how I ended up at Entertainment Weekly magazine, which is the opposite of a tough, gritty, true crime beat. But I had started, I went into journalism because I was I've always been kind of fascinated with bad things that happen and why. The sequence of events, when you go back through, true crime and incredibly sad cases, and figuring out there's always that strange sense of inevitability to it, where you kind of unravel the past and you think, well, if all these people got together in this particular situation on this particular day, this bad thing was going to happen, and that's always interested me in kind of reverse engineering sort of how these awful things happen. So I went to Northwestern, and that was my plan, was to be a crime reporter and do that for a living. And I very, very, very quickly found out that I was not made of that tough stuff that is necessary to do that. I'm a very unassertive, slightly wimpy, overly polite sort of person, which is not what's going to take. So I kind of backed away from that very quickly and thought, well, I've already signed up for journalism school. I guess I got to figure out what else I'm going to do, and ended up going into arts and entertainment coverage and ended up at Entertainment Weekly. But that interest has always remained with me, and I think that's why is trying to figure out why those things happen. And I have always been a true crime sort of obsessee. I try to be more careful now about how I consume that, because I think we all have to be aware that you are consuming other people's tragedy, and to not just flip around, and load yourself up on these kind of overly sensationally done journalism shows, and to read and watch people who are respectful about it.
And obviously that was part of Gone Girl too, the whole true crime angle. But let's move back to a little bit more about how you write. So there is that true crime angle in a lot of your stories, but you also have a wonderful sense of place in your stories. Although you live in Chicago now, you're from Kansas and Missouri, Kansas City area, and you really do a great job in your books, like using all 5 senses to describe the place. I still remember, I made some notes of things I remember, the smell of the chicken farms in Sharp Objects, those endless cornfields in dark places, and sort of being somewhere and then in the middle of nowhere with no one around to help you. They almost become a character themselves, these settings. What draws you back to those locations, and how do you take setting into account when you're writing in terms of the part it plays in the story you're trying to tell?
Well, to me, setting is one of the most important for me personally as a reader and a writer. If I don't have a sense of place in something I'm reading, I very quickly disengage from it, even if I like the characters. Because to me, you are where you're from, like, for good, for bad, those places imprint on you. And I do find myself circling back to Missouri and Kansas, and partly it's because those places still call to me, from those places I knew as childhood, those far out farm fields in Kansas, the broken down intersection of Kansas City, Missouri, and some of those neighborhoods, and they're very evocative for me and very easy for me to write about. And also because like I feel like the Midwest needs its due. Like I feel like, like everything's set in New York and LA, or these kind of big cities, and to me it's a very underused area of the country, and in a way it's almost easier to write about than it is to write in a new way about New York, or in a new way about some of these these bigger cities. And it's fun. You kind of have room to let your imagination roam around. And as someone from Kansas City who has spent many years working in New York City, I can tell you, like, you can tell a New Yorker, like, anything about Kansas City, and they'll just be like, is that right? Like, they'd be like, you know what, like, Kansas Cityans never pay for dinner. Like, someone else always pays. And then we kill a puppy. And they'd be like, okay, well, I will respect your culture. So it gives you that license to kind of roam around a little bit. And, I like, anyone who's read my stuff knows I like to kind of tiptoe onto the edge of a little bit of Gothicness. And so it's kind of fun to reinvent these places.
How do the people back home feel about the way you portray it, though?
I mean, I'm from Kansas City, and I go back all the time. All my family still lives there. Tons of my friends from high school and college still live there. So among them, they know whenever I'm writing about, the weird salads that we make, and, the 8-layer dips, and, all that, our over dyed hair and stuff, it's like, they know it's coming from a very loving place, and that's what I prefer to eat too. I mean, some of the stuff I list in Gone Girl, through Amy, who's a New Yorker, her sort of snarky look at the Midwest, and, I'm describing a meal that my family would absolutely eat. Like when I talk about pickle rolls, where it's pickles wrapped in cream cheese, wrapped in ham.
Yeah.
Love it.
You did start to mention too that move toward the Gothic, and in the book I wrote about horror, you're in the chapter, we talked about this, you and I, before, called Not Quite Horror, and you've mentioned how the horror community has embraced you as that too. Because they're creepy books, they're anxiety-inducing, they're nail-biters, and there's really, truly evil people in these books. And you might call them monsters, but they're completely real people. These are not supernatural beings, which in many ways is almost worse, as when you're reading it in terms of your fear. But they're dark fiction. What draws you to writing dark fiction?
I mean, I don't necessarily have like the easiest answer to that. I was just one of those kids who I loved horror movies growing up. I love scaring myself. I think there are people who do anything not to scare themselves, and there are people who sort of like go out of their way to try to scare themselves. And I was always kind of one of those kids who, growing up, I loved being freaked out. I loved not being able to sleep at night. I just kind of found it really fun. It invigorated me, and so I think when I started writing, I originally actually started writing Sharp Objects, and I wasn't entirely sure what it was going to be. I knew it was going to be about a very toxic relationship between a mother and daughter, and I knew I wanted to write about the particular brand of female violence and female anger that I didn't feel was written about very often, but I wasn't sure what form it was going to take. And then it kind of very slowly became, at first it kind of became a mystery, and then it became this kind of, Southern Gothic sort of mystery. And I was writing it, I had my day job at Entertainment Weekly, so during the day, I was going on to film sets, and, I wrote that book on location because I was traveling tons then. So I wrote it in New Zealand on the, Lord of the Rings. I wrote it after spending a day with Johnny Knoxville on the set of Jackass, the movie. And I think part of it was it went darker just because otherwise it felt like more work. It's like, you write all day and then, you write more. And so to me, it was almost it was a very different tone from what I was writing, which is, EW is a very kind of jocular, funny, conversational sort of tone. And so I think, at night I'd be like, darker, darker. And I think it's also funny because I don't think there is a single pop culture reference in Sharp Objects, actually. I think I was trying to divorce myself so much. These people could have been, like, I don't think they have cell phones, like, they don't listen to music, apparently. Like, they could have been any sort of time period and everything. And I think part of it, why I started on that vein was my interest in that.
They sit on the porch and drink, yeah in the hot nights, yeah. Let's
eat their pickle rolls.